move to the 20th century. So moving on to the 20th century, with World Wars I and II, the U.S. tried to stay on the sidelines of both those wars. Wilson was reelected on a slogan, on a promise to stay out of the war, which by then in 1916 was raging into its third year. After World War I, isolationism was, the U.S. was a thoroughly isolationist country. Why did the U.S. want to stay on the sidelines of both world wars, and why did it fail to do so?
Just quickly on the dates here. World War I breaks out August 1st, 1914, and we declare war in April 1917. So we're on the sidelines for 14 and 15, probably 3 years. And World War II in Europe, and really in general, breaks out September 1st, 1939. That's when the Wehrmacht invades Poland, September 1st, 1939. It's the fall of France in 1940 that really spooks us. And then a year later, June 22nd, 1941, is when the Wehrmacht invades Soviet Union, which really spooks us. And we don't get in until December of 41 with Pearl Harbor. We're attacked on December 7th, 1941, and then Hitler does us an enormous favor and declares war against us on December 11th, 1941. But apropos what Jennifer was saying, we stayed out a long time before World War I. We joined World War I, and we stayed out for quite a while before we joined World War II. And in both cases, very important to emphasize, we did hardly anything before those wars broke out to prevent those wars. Now, the reason that you stay out, if you're the United States, is that you want other countries to do the heavy lifting when it comes to defeating the single power that threatens to dominate all of Europe. It's Imperial Germany in World War I, and it's Nazi Germany in World War II. Let's just talk about World War II, because I think it illustrates the point very well. To defeat Imperial Germany in World War I was a Herculean task. The French, the British, and the Russians suffered enormously. Enormously. You know lots of stories about World War I on the Western Front. So when World War I is over with, the question is, when Nazi Germany comes to the fore, who's going to pay the blood price to defeat Nazi Germany? This is the calculation. Everybody understands. Once Hitler begins to rearm, creates the Wehrmacht, here we go again. And the Germans, as you know, are really good at fighting wars. I could go into that chapter and verse, right? And there are many of them, right? And to defeat them, somebody's going to have to pay a huge blood price. And by the way, you know who does pay that blood price? It's the Soviet Union. 27 million people. That's the number that's officially used these days. 27 million people die. Soviet people die. They paid the blood price. We paid much less of a blood price. We don't land at Normandy until June 6, 1944. The war is over with May 8th, 1945. So 11 months before the war is over, we land at Normandy. Stalin had been screaming bloody murder, saying, when are you going to engage the Wehrmacht on the European continent? We were in Italy, but that was not enough to satisfy Stalin. He wanted us to land at the beaches in France. When we land on the beaches in France, June 6, 1944, 11 months before the war ends, at that point, 93% of German casualties were on the Eastern Front, right? The Soviets are principally responsible for winning World War II. Well, if you're an American leader, that's an ideal situation, because you don't want 27 million of your people to die fighting against the Wehrmacht. You'd rather the Soviets do that. It's not that we were glad the Soviets were paying that blood price. We just didn't want to pay that blood price, right? One more dimension to this that's worth thinking about. one of the reasons that Hitler is almost impossible to stop until he invades the Soviet Union is the British and the French are trying to get the Soviets to do the dirty work. The Soviets are trying to get the British and the French to do the dirty work. And the British are staying on the sidelines and trying to get the French, because they're physically located on the European continent, to do the dirty work. So everybody's buck passing, and we're staying on the sidelines. And this is what allows Hitler to pick off his adversaries one at a time. He takes Poland, with the help of the Soviet Union, mind you, in 1939. He gets a free shot at France in 1940 because the Soviets are allied with him. And then he finishes off the French and the British, and he turns against the Soviet Union. He gets a one-on-one shot at the Soviet Union. This is all the end result of people not wanting to pay the blood price of defeating the Third Reich. And this basic logic applies to the United States. And we have the luxury of having a giant ocean between us and Europe. So we can sit back and we can tell the British, oh, you do it, we'll give you Lend-Lease and so forth and so on. We'll give the Russians some help, or the Soviets some help here and there. So they do the heavy lifting. But what happens in both of those wars is it looks like the bad guys are going to win, right? I could go into this chapter and verse. When France falls in 1940, you cannot underestimate the extent to which FDR is spooked. And then when the Germans invade the Soviet Union in the summer of 1941, Stalin has purged the Red Army at the top. He, in fact, decapitates the Red Army. The Red Army had performed very poorly in Finland. And, of course, the Wehrmacht looked like it was unstoppable. Roosevelt thought that the Soviet Army the Red Army was going to be defeated, and Germany was going to end up dominating all of Europe. And he did everything he could to get us in the war. That's another whole story. And the same thing happened with Wilson. As I said to you before, I could tell you a story how we won that war in the sense that we tipped the balance at the very end. But you all remember, the Germans took on the French, the British, and the Russians all at once. And they knocked the Russians out of the war in 1917. This is the October Revolution. This is when the Soviet Union is created. It's in the middle of the war. French army mutinies in May 1917. It's going down the tubes. And the British are beginning to get cold feet. Lloyd George is saying, maybe I don't want to send more troops over there. And the German army, once the Russians drop out, have a huge number of forces against the French and the British. And then we come in. And we make the difference at the very end. But anyway, this is a long-winded way of just saying our basic policy when you're dealing with a rival great power is to let the locals, the neighbors, defeat that great power. And if we do have to come in at the last moment and win the victory.
Mission accomplished.